Guess what?
Kendall, I did not hear you 1 second. I'm trying to figure out why.
City guest exclamation
Hour, like we
R.
are.
We talking?
Wait a minute.
Kendall, will you try to speak again and see if we can hear you?
Yeah, how about now? Okay, I think we actually might be getting Mike Hanson too. I think he had an opening on his calendar, so looks like he's joining. We'll give him maybe just a second here.
What is it?
And then guys, I'm gonna prepare the agenda up just real quick.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, sorry about that.
You're good.
So, one thing about
Understood. You have a meeting. Oh, I didn't remember, and that doesn't go well.
So just so the commission is aware, I didn't anticipate that you would want to make a motion on anything today, but I did include that as an option in the agenda, just in case. But I kind of figured you wouldn't want to. But I didn't want you to not have the ability to, if you so chose.
Sorry. So this will be an official.
All work sessions are, your guys would get this. It's an official meeting.
That is true. So Dale, good man. Bring the meeting to, bring it to order. Order, yeah. Roll call.
Lynn here.
John here. Dale here. Tommy here.
Ben here.
Keith is here. And Drew Eschler. Got a full quorum. Nice. And then we turn the time over to
And Kendall, you should have full ability to share your screen as needed for Mike who's doing it.
Okay, sounds good. I'll go ahead and share my screen, so give me just 1 second. Let me pop my video off, because sometimes my computer lags if I've got too much going on. Alright. Okay, so hopefully you should be seeing my screen here. You should have the Title 17 in front of you. See that?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay. All right. So we thought it might be beneficial to have just kind of a discussion about some of the proposed changes in Title 17, which is the city zoning regulations. Kind of similar to what we did with the building and construction title and the subdivision ordinance, where we just kind of gave you guys a crash course with what else kind of transpired in the document up until this point. So that's kind of the strategy for today. There are a couple of areas where I'd kind of like to focus a spin on, because I think that the planning commission's participation and suggestions and comments and feedback would be beneficial in those particular areas. So I'll let you know when we hit those areas. I figured I would kind of start off, I'm going to try to hopefully not skip around too much, but we'll just start top to bottom, and then we might end up coming back to the areas that I want to kind of focus in on, if that's okay with you guys. And we'll just start with the real quick rundown. So the first chapter in the zoning ordinance is 1701, which is the general provisions. And within this title, chapter, one of the first things that you'll notice that we're suggesting that the city add is this new section that we call authority. And the recommendation here is that we add this authority section just because you do need a reference to 10.9A of State Code, which is the Municipal Land Use and Development Management Act. And so that's where a lot of the powers that the city has, to be able to regulate land use and things come from. So it's always good to have kind of that standard, reference, or guiding point, inserted into your code. And that's just one of those things that we saw that, was lacking in this section. So not really anything earth shattering, or, life changing here. It's just something that we think is good best practice. So that's the reason for that recommendation right there. When you get into the section 1701-050, which used to be called building permit required, and then 060 occupancy permit required, and then even 080, which is in section. The language that was previously contained in these sections, is actually more adequately addressed in the adopted building codes. So the recommendation that we have for you here is that you actually, remove the existing language that's in those and retool it just a little bit. Because you don't want to create any redundancy or have any conflicts with the adopted building codes, which, like I said, address those specific issues. Drew can probably attest to this, way more, consistently, and even he might be able to argue a little bit better, than maybe what you had existing in the code. So the thought for 050 is actually to expand it and go a little bit broader. And instead of saying that building permits required, make a requirement that all, permits and licenses, that are issued by the city need to actually be in compliance with the zoning ordinance. That's something that's a little bit more standard, a little bit more commonly seen, and actually is going to be a little bit, more helpful, when you're actually trying to enforce some of the provisions that are found, within this particular title. And then in 060, instead of talking about an occupancy permit being required, which again is going to be addressed by the building permit code, the building codes. In a section talking about omissions, not being a waiver. And so this is, kind of a best practice add, and just kind of a general reminder that if something is inadvertently, omitted, that it's not considered a waiver of the requirement that it be in the code. So that's just kind of good language again to have for enforcement. Because as perfect as we like to be, the reality is we're all human. And so sometimes you need to have, sections like that and language like that in order to be able to make sure that you can fully enforce, what you need to in the code. And then on the inspection section, again, this is addressed by the building code, so we actually don't think that it's needed. So we're actually proposing that you just eliminate, that section in particular because it's addressed by the building code, so it's redundant to have this, in this particular title. And then you have a couple of sections that are in here, the telecommunication facilities, which is found in, section, 1701-100. And then there's another one, that is, 180. So it's going to be a little bit further on down here, so sorry for scrolling, which addresses the short-term residential property lease. When you look at the context that's contained within this first section, here, and the fact that it's supposed to be intended for general provisions, we feel like these don't quite fit in this particular section. So the recommendation that we actually have for you here is that we just pick these right out of this section, and relocate them into 1704, which is the supplementary regulations that go with this title. We think that that will be, from an organization standpoint, people are going to be able to find the requirements a lot easier, if they're relocated into a more relevant section instead of being kind of disconnected, into this general provision section. And then you also have definitions, that are contained within, 1701. So very similar to the subdivision ordinance, what we've gone through is we've made a pass to incorporate, relevant definitions, that are contained, within Utah State Code, that you probably are going to need or want, in this title. And then, we also have some graphics. Because sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So in some of these definitions, if we had a graphic, that we thought might be helpful to include, We've inserted those in as recommendations as well, so you'll see some additions of graphics that talk about building envelopes, illustrate how to determine building height. I think there's also some when you get down into the lots, where there's also diagrams for lot types, and lot lines, you know, how to figure out all this. So that's kind of the highlight for 1701. Before I move on to talk about the next section, any questions or comments?
Kendall?
Yes.
This probably won't be relevant to this section, but where you have the images, can you back up there? Is that something that we could implement further down in this title on yard setbacks?
Yeah, so if you think that a graphic would be handier, in location-wise in a different portion of the document, we could absolutely, move the graphic around. We can also upload it, additionally, again, when we hit the relevant section where you'd like to have a quick reference to it. We can also, when we upload the final deliverable in the Civic Link too, we can also create some internal hyperlinking so that when you're within that section, it will pop you back to this definition and this graphic. So there's lots of different ways we can do that. So if that's something, that you guys would like to see, I just need to know where you'd like to see that.
Yeah, I just like the way a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So especially in the yard setbacks, when we get down into the sections of the yards and the setbacks, I think that would be helpful to have an image as well, side yards especially, because that's where it gets really confusing.
Sure.
Do you want graphics in with policy, or is that better to put in like a general standard drawing type scenario?
Well, it'll be policy. It's just describing the policy, I guess. Or the ordinance.
Yeah, so when it comes to zoning regulations and things like the illustration for where lot lines are and how those are determined, those you'll frequently see inserted directly in line within those relevant titles, like the zoning ordinance, like we're talking about today. Where that kind of gets to be confusing is when it comes to subdivision regulations, when you actually start to think about, you know, this particular street section and how things like that need to be actually constructed. Those type of requirements, you'll see just by practice, typically go in a separate document altogether. So that's probably why it's a little bit confusing to kind of see graphics here in this particular title. But, you know, since we were just talking about the subdivision ordinance, knowing that a lot of the graphics and the renderings are found within a different document, some of that just goes back to kind of how codes have transpired over the years and kind of what the traditional best practice approach has been. So that's kind of the explanation for why you do see inline graphics inserted into this title here, because it's pretty common to actually have that. Okay, so we're ready. I'll move on to the next section here. So you guys don't currently have the 1702. Currently, it's reserved. One of the things that we're proposing, and this is going to be, sorry, for struggling, need to get down to it here. So just like we did in the subdivision ordinance, where we recommended the addition of a section that houses all of the, well, the designation of land use authority table, you know, that big reference table that we're talking about with all the different flavors of applications that you could have, and then who are reviewing and recommending, and land use authorities and appeal authorities for all of that. If you remember, also in the, that particular chapter in the subdivision ordinance, we also proposed and kind of filled out the procedures for all these different types of land use applications. Because that's one of the things as we were going through and analyzing the city's existing code. That's kind of one of the areas that we saw that was a little bit short in terms of context. And that's actually not too uncommon for us to find, is just where there's a lack of where, it's actually been gone through and written out, what the actual application processing, steps are, what procedural elements are. And I think that's traditionally been the case because, staff often gets stretched in 6 million different directions, and is usually busy, and just has a hard time keeping up with, text amendments and things like that to be able to address those particular elements. The other thing I'll tell you too, because I do this, all day, every day, is it's a very tedious thing to do, to have to sit down and write out procedurally step by step each of these different applications, from start to finish, the whole process, everything has to go through. But I think that's the other reason why just traditionally Mike and I have seen that, just folks come up short in that aspect. So within this new title, or within this new chapter, sorry, you'll see the, designation of land use authority. Again, this creates consistency, between the subdivision ordinance and then the zoning ordinance. Because the two do kind of have to talk to each other. So you've got that particular element, and then you'll see where we've gone in and we've kind of outlined the typical things. So the general application requirements, this is very consistent to what we wrote in the subdivision ordinance. But like the process for general plan amendments, we've gone in and we've outlined kind of the typical process for that. One for zoning map changes and for zoning text amendments, so that applicants kind of know what's required if they want to pursue one of those particular types of applications. Now, the city already had some language when it came to conditional use permits and the procedure and process the city used. But what we're proposing here is a little bit more robust, and kind of written in the same style as we've outlined these other procedures. The conditional use process that was already defined in the city's code, that's actually in the conditional use section of the code. By putting it here with all the other administrative processes, I think that's going to make administration and kind of enforcement and also organization of this document be a little bit more user friendly to use. The other advantage to disputing the procedural portion of the conditional use permits is it then opens up that title for you to repurpose and retool. One of the things that Mike and I we try to encourage with conditional uses in particular, because the state, is how they are with conditional uses, which is they pretty much have to be approved unless, there's a really, really, really good reason why they shouldn't be approved. We recommend that on conditional uses that you actually start defining and listing out the specific criteria for what some of those conditional use permits are, so that as applicant to applicant comes in front of you, you have consistent requirements that you can apply for those particular types of conditional uses. The benefit to doing that, once you've outlined kind of those particular requirements, is at a future date and time, as you process, and make sure that all those requirements that you've written for that particular conditional use, as you've gotten to a point with it where you fully address kind of all of the standard issues that come up with that particular uses, you would then, at that point in time, you can then start looking at, okay, instead of making this particular use go through a conditional use process, because we have all the requirements, regulations, in order to address it and to mitigate its negative aspects, can you then start shifting some of those into permitted uses within some of the zoning districts, and to kind of start to move some of those conditional uses from permit to permitted uses potentially. So that's kind of a dive off into another category to talk about when we get a little bit further into that 1708. But just know that for this particular element, we're proposing the procedural part of conditional uses be put into this new chapter. And then we also have site plan review. I think you guys were previously referring to it as design review, and it's found within 1713. Kind of same concept like with the conditional uses. the procedure, doing a little bit more robust, to adequately cover all of the, portions of your site plan review or your design review. And putting them kind of up here in the same chapter. Let's see what else. So just like the subdivision, title, again, the, option for temporary land use regulations that the city council needs to be able to utilize that. And then some of the standard things in order to ensure consistency, and compliance with state statute. That's what this notice challenge section is all about, and then also the applicant notice waiver requirements. Those are specifically to address your statutory requirements there. So trying to keep some of this in mind, this is one of the sections, this new 1702 that I want to come back to so that we can specifically discuss all of the bodies that we have proposed in the boxes. But just for the sake of trying to move through and give you guys kind of the comprehensive overview of what's going on, just know that we're going to come back to that, and I'm going to keep going for a second if that's okay.
So I have a question on the,
Yeah.
on the, table up above, destination of land use authority. Did you say that those are all gonna be, quick links to the applications?
Yeah, we can make them link to the applications.
Were you planning on it, or is it just an option?
You totally have that as an option. I wasn't planning, to turn them into links, but if that's the preference, that when we do the upload, that you guys would like to have made, absolutely, we can do that. I don't see any problem with that.
Would it be helpful?
I think when people do come to apply for something, they're not in the code looking for that application. So I think if we just have a general, they're gonna come to us as staff to help them navigate, the application portion of it.
You're gonna go through this and say, oh, I wish that was a quick link that I could just click on, because I know where that table's at.
Adding a quick link is very easy. Yeah, you just,
Well, it's gonna be me.
Yeah, I think you're right, though, yeah.
Or assisting them to fill out the application, I should say, so.
Yeah, and it's also something too that's easy to do in the future, Drew. So if it does pan out that there is a need for that, or Hyperlink can do some of that. We absolutely at any point in time can hop into the Civic Link platform.
We would have,
and turn those into
literally,
hyperlinks.
we would have to change and it's nothing that we couldn't do, but right now, the way we have our application, we would have to link that. It's all in the same application, so that makes sense. So, yeah.
And once that title implementation is done, all of our applications are gonna get reworked and digitized in there, so.
Yeah, I could see at some point when we change the application process on our end, from the administrative side, could potentially be a benefit, but that's something we can always go back and do.
Yeah, the other thing that we can do, if we don't want it to link to the specific application form, is we can link it down into the subsequent process where the procedure is actually outlined in detail. We can turn those into hyperlinks there. So within the 17205, it'll actually pop down to kind of this whole process that we've outlined for general plan amendments, where it would just auto kick them to this 1702020, if they click on it. So that's another option that we got too, is putting a link in the table to the more detailed process and the section that that's found in.
I like that.
Yeah.
Personally.
All right, so 1703 appeal authorities, there's not a whole lot here, to go through and discuss. So you're gonna see some general, clarity and correctness edits that we proposed, and some of these are just to ensure that you've got complete consistency, with, state requirements. That's why instead of calling it appeal authorities, you also have some variance, information to the variance, authorities too as well. So incorporating that variance aspect into here, and then, 1703-070. This is where you'll start to see kind of some of those, proposed edits, just for consistency, and it's 1097. So it's kind of in these 070. So that's a consistency thing, that we're recommending there, just adding some additional language in there. And then we also found, a redundant section in here. So judicial review of decision, 1703-190, is actually, hinted at in this 170. So we feel like the 170 section up here, handles that. So, we think you can actually, just remove that 190, section, and just avoid the redundancy there. So that's I'll be really quick summary of what we found in that one. When you get into 1704 supplementary regulations, so this is where you'll see us, recommending that you insert, the short-term residential property lease, the telecommunications facilities. Again, those were previously up in the 1701 section. We feel that they're way more appropriately located, in this section here. For the most part, these sections are just clarity and correctness, edits, that we're suggesting. Didn't really find too much in here that maybe needs to be looked at unless there's a specific, policy discussion or pain point, that the city currently has on items that are found, within the section. There was one issue that we found was kind of the internal accessory dwelling unit language. There's a current requirement here that says the internal accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed 1,000 square feet. And that you actually can't do, if it looks with 1095-30. So we're just proposing that you remove that requirement.
Kendall,
Make sure that you're in compliance there, yes.
so with the new regulations, maybe these haven't been put in and adopted yet from the legislative side of Utah. But they were talking about the ADUs and the internal dwelling or accessory dwelling units as well being mandatory within, I think it's 60% of our zones. Has that been adopted
Yeah.
yet?
I think it's in there, yes. So I should probably go back and double check and make sure that we're all there.
Okay,
I think you are, because I think at the time, I think it had just passed, and I'm pretty sure they already looked at that. Make sure that we didn't have anything that conflicts, but, a double check doesn't hurt anybody, so I will add that to my list.
yeah, we might want to just check into that while we're talking about.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, so are there any pain points, in the city's existing regulations in the 1704 section, your supplementary, that maybe need to be addressed? Kind of along that line, Stu, where it's like, do we need to double check ADU requirements or anything else like that?
The only concern, and you relocated, would just be the short-term rentals and the telecommunications. So I think that's suiting to just put it here and delete from the other section.
Okay. All right, so let's get into 1705, non-conforming uses and non-compliant structures. Again, this is going to be very similar style edits as what we're proposing in the appeal authorities. So just a little bit of clarity and correctness edits. One of the things that's in here too is currently, I think the city has in their code that it's the planning and zoning commission that should determine non-conforming and non-compliant statuses of properties. In practice, what we traditionally see across the state is that power has been delegated to the zoning administrator. Because from a procedural standpoint, in order to determine non-conforming or non-complying, typically there's a lot of research that staff and or the zoning administrator has to do in order to be able to even, make heads or tails of the situation. And usually through that research, there's usually a pretty good determination that can be made, from a staff standpoint. And so that's, I think, traditionally why, municipalities have moved towards just, giving that power, to the zoning administrator. The city doesn't have to do that. They could, choose to leave that as the planning and zoning commission, if that's their preference. One of the other things to take into consideration too is, just the workload that the planning commission has, all the various different types of applications and things like that that they do need to review. So, I would toss that out there, kind of as your factor in your decision, because with Senate Bill 174, now planning commission, as a land use authority is going to be way more involved in, the single family, two family, and townhome projects as being kind of that reviewing and approving body, in that aspect. So are there any thoughts on changing that from planning and zoning to zoning administrator? Is the consensus that that approach is okay, or do we not want to do that?
I thought it was that way already. That was.
Okay.
Keep it going the way it is.
Well, the way that we've been operating has been with the change. We didn't realize, I guess, that was, a non-conforming status to come back to the planning and zoning board. It's more of a enforcing of the existing ordinance.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so if you guys are already doing it via zoning administrator, we probably just should make it official then.
Does
Yes.
that have any difference on that?
No.
Okay, I think we're good, Kendall, there.
Okay, I'm gonna have you guys hang on just a second. I had that went a little wonky. I don't know, it sounds to me like you guys are in a tin can, so give me just 30 seconds.
You guys can grab some
Yeah,
pizza
that'll be a good time.
while we're waiting.
And there's cold water.
We can deliver even.
Thank you for the pizza, Dean.
Thank you. Dean was just around.
Okay, that's much better. I'm sorry. That's embarrassing.
We're letting everyone grab a little bit of pizza, Kendall, so you're all right.
All right. Okay, like I said, that's pretty much the extent of, what we found, in that particular section. I don't think it's anything, crazy. So we'll just make sure that we got, that process, not, like just supporting the very consistent. The next one is the off-street parking, and we did add things, to the section, that's in here. So underneath number of parking spaces, there was an existing line in the table that talks about all other uses not listed above. So we needed to do a little bit of wordsmithing here, because it previously read that that should be as determined by the building inspector, which doesn't necessarily read true anymore with a lot of the changes that are being proposed. So that's now going to read as determined by the land use authority. And then the other thing that we inserted into this section is the flexible language that can be utilized by the land use authority in determining kind of the other uses. So there's some language in here so that the land use authority can do a little bit of comparison if they don't have a specific calculation listed for that use, where they can either use similar uses that are on that table, or they might be able to look at similar sized jurisdictions, what they require, or industry standard best practices, for how to come up with what that calculation needs to be for that particular use.
Hey, Kendall, before you move on too far on that one, so who would be considered the land use authority in that scenario there? Is it always gonna
Depends
be?
on what kind of application it is. If it's a conditional use, that land use authority, could be different, than, somebody just reviewing a permitted use. So there's,
So,
I guess it would depend on the application in front of you.
okay, so basically we would default back to the chart that you previously had up there.
Yep.
There's only one.
Yep, and that's the reason for using, the term land use authority, because it does need to be able to apply to whoever's serving in that capacity.
Okay, just on that land use authority discussion, so we've been in discussions with council, with the mayor. They aren't necessarily wanting the lot line adjustment, something as simple as a lot line adjustment to come through the process. That's something administratively that can be handled.
Yes.
Is that covered? I didn't see that in your,
Because it would be covered under the subdivision,
Okay.
proposal, so we outlined the first boundary adjustments and the lot line adjustments.
okay,
In the subdivision title, and I believe we did make them simple. I believe we haven't put as the administrator because the state is kind of tied, the municipality's hands, when it comes to what can actually be considered, when it comes, down to those particular types of things, what can even come before the municipality for approval. And when it does have to come, when it is allowed to come before the municipality, they have a very tight timeline they have to comply with. And I don't think that, in practice lends itself to a planning commission. You almost have to do it as a staff, administrative approval, otherwise you can't, be in compliance with the timeline.
Okay.
That the state requires. So, we can double check that, but I'm pretty sure that we already that should be an issue.
okay, thank you.
So the other thing, that we added in here language-wise is, some flexible language so that, if the land use authority does feel that they need a site-specific traffic study, to be able to analyze, kind of those parking demands, especially when you're dealing with a building maybe that has, multiple uses, multiple businesses where parking, is a concern. That you've got language that you then can rely on, in order to be able to require that, if needed. Let's see, the other thing that I noticed when I was going through this section is that there wasn't a, mention of what the typical off-street parking, size space is. So we've inserted that. Typically in practice it's 9 by 20. Parallels usually 9 by 25. There's some jurisdictions in Utah that like to go 10 by 20 or 10 by 25. 9 is kind of a little bit more nationally recognized kind of as the standard. So there is a little bit of flexibility there depending upon what you've traditionally, calculated those spaces to be, but it's always good to actually put that in writing. So that as they're doing their site planning, they know exactly what size parking spaces they need to be, basing everything off of. Same thing with loading spaces, I have those as 10 by 25 with a minimum height of 14 feet.
Yeah, we do have, so what's our existing? Yeah, okay. Never mind.
Yeah, your existing didn't call it out, I didn't see it listed, so, if you do have it listed somewhere, maybe it's on an application form or something, maybe we just need to formalize that.
You didn't find it in the portion of the titles anywhere else, because we think it's in there somewhere.
I think it's actually in there, most of that 9 feet there by 20, so I think that's pretty much in
With what we had, or what our practicing policy was, whether it was in here or not. Okay. We should be good then.
Okay. And then the other thing, just, addressing the accessible parking spaces, and then, we gave you a thought here for off-street loading requirements. So if you had a other policy that's been kind of the typical practice, I didn't see it outlined, when it comes to either of those two things. So we just dropped you some template language that you can use. This, off-street loading, requirements we actually pulled from a jurisdiction that's about the same size as Roosevelt. Or similar, so if there's an alternative thought for maybe how you wanna figure out how to require those or calculate those, or where I have to make adjustments in this section.
There's a whole section of off-street parking.
Yeah, we've got a whole section in our code on off-street parking.
This is load, she's talking about loading, off-street loading.
Just loading?
There's the parking and then the loading.
Okay, did you find, okay, I see what you're referencing to, just the loading, where we didn't have anything before defining the loading?
Right,
Okay,
right, yeah. Correct, so, those are the additions that you're gonna see in the, parking section. Okay, 1707 home occupations, again, just clarity correctness, we didn't see anything, on our end, that needed to be adjusted, unless there's something that the city has that needs to be, addressed regarding home occupations.
I think we're pretty good there, Kendall.
Moving on to conditional uses, so again, I left this currently, but, some of this probably needs to be struck out a little bit. If we do like the changes in that 1702 section, with moving kind of the procedural, portion into this chapter. There is kind of some redundancy, going on in here, with that. What the other insertion for this too is, when you're making that determination, we also try to give you the standards for review. Some typical language, for just the different aspects that need to be kind of considered, essentially when you're looking at, conditional uses. I think you have something similar, existing, in the code, but this is just what we proposed, to try to, I don't know, more clearly illustrate it and maybe, make it a little bit more, digestible, for applicants who might be coming before you, with conditional use applications. Because a lot of times it's not a, developer in those instances, it's actually a resident of the community. And usually they're very novice, when it comes to, code requirements and things like that. So we wanted to try to scale that down a little bit and make that a little bit more digestible for them, in these particular sections, so they know kind of the elements that their application is going to be reviewed for. But if there's anything in here, thought-wise, that maybe needs to be included, or, you don't care for that particular approach, we can go back and, take a look at that. So that was what we've got going on, in the conditional use section. The, chapter 1710 regarding the manufactured homes. So we're proposing, that the city strike this, chapter, in its entirety. Drew, I think I talked to you about this at the time, but this is so that you're compliant with 1095-14. And I actually have that pulled up here. So when it comes to manufactured homes, the state's kind of changed their policy. So they need to be installed, on a permanent foundation, but kind of the more important aspect here, which is why we're suggesting that you remove it. Those 1710 requirements is the other 2 and 3. And 2 says the manufactured home may not be excluded from any land use zone or area in which a single family residence would be permitted, provided that the manufactured home complies with all local land use ordinance and building. So again, being attached to the permanent foundation. And then they do have caveats in here if there are any restricted covenants or things like that, that exclude them specifically within those developments. And then you have 3 that says the municipality may not adopt or enforce an ordinance or regulation that treats proposed development that includes manufactured homes differently than one that does not include them.
Kendall, I don't think we've had a chance to talk about this section. So what the state has come out with, evidently as of 2011, is that when?
Yeah, 2011 was the last time it was touched.
Okay.
So it's been a while now that these rules have been in play. And it's basically to, I think to address kind of some of the affordable housing, aspects and making sure that you have allotments, within your jurisdiction, to be able to provide some of those housing opportunities,
So
to a wide variety of incomes and family styles and things like that.
So right now, we only allow manufactured housing in our R16, RM13, and 18 zone. So this would basically trump that ordinance and state that anywhere a single-family dwelling, we have to allow a HUD home.
Yeah, manufactured home, if they install it on permanent foundation, yes, you can exclude it.
It's basically saying you can't discriminate
Mm.
against that. I don't agree with that.
I don't
Because
either.
banks treat it differently.
They do.
So why,
So is that something we can?
I think that is in place. Pre-manufactured, it's shipped in, it's not so that you have a bunch of trailer.
And they still can.
Actually, it's not.
What
It's
is
not,
it for?
it's all with that.
Yeah, it's built to a different code.
That does not want you discriminating against it. And if it goes to a legal deal, we would lose it. So I think it's good to adopt this. It doesn't fit with what we've done in the past, that it is a HUD regulation, and unfortunately, I think best thing is go with this, because HUD's very protective of their house.
Gotcha, okay. That's,
I have a question. What is considered a permanent foundation?
built to the code. A foundation built to the building code.
Well, I've
It can be.
installed septic systems out in the county where they just pour a slab and set it on piers under there and tie it down to that concrete slab and put skirting around it. Is that a
That would-
permanent foundation?
There's a permanent foundation, and then there's a park set. Park sets go in trailer homes. That's where you have the vinyl skirting and all this and that. Definition of a permanent foundation is a footing with cinder block, a footing with 4 cement walls, or a treated wood footing on gravel with solid walls that you just can't take in place.
So.
I've got a handout, if you want to see it later on, I can show you the differences. But it's different than a park. That's where you have to line up.
so a developer, if a developer comes in, develops a home and puts in, CC and Rs, can they put in there no manufactured homes?
According to this, unless it's an HO.
Don't we have size requirements though?
I would think that covenants would trump this.
Covenants would trump it, so
I would think that covenants would, yes, because he's designating what can happen on his ground. There's ground in general without covenants, I think that this would apply.
so as much as it stinks, we probably need to like bring that up
Yeah.
when developers come in.
Now, the biggest thing I see in this is amending this to double wide. That might be a question for her is double wides in housing zones rather than single wides.
Well, that's in our code now, Kendall. So right now, it has to be a double wide, 1,000 square foot minimum.
Yeah, the other thing I was just gonna say, and I showed my code, see if I can remember where it is. The state, they actually did put in some language about the minimum. And I may have to look this up for you and send it to you, but it's gonna speak to that element.
Okay.
About, I'm trying to remember the exact wording off the top of my head, but I think it's prohibited to, from enacting a regulation that sets a minimum.
So the city can't set requirements that
So, yeah,
trump-
let me find that for you.
Well,
It's a new ad.
I'm looking at what's on, what's, shows us our code now, and it says it has to be 24 feet wide. It has to be manufactured after June 15th, 1976. And has a roof structure must be pitched, shingle equivalent.
And it does give the zones that it is.
Yeah.
So Kendall,
R16.
the question has been brought up. Is there anything the city can do to keep it tied to the existing zones that we have now? I guess not.
The way I'm reading that, I don't think there is, but probably what I should do is probably only applicable code sections pertaining to this issue. And I think we probably need to do just a little bit deeper dive.
Okay, yeah, I think this is
Um,
gonna be a hot topic, so I think we probably better.
Yeah, and totally, and I think that's the fairest thing that we can do is we can present you with all the relevant, state statute sections, to be able, so that we can all have an informed discussion on it and know what variables are in place. So that would be what I would recommend is let me go back and pull all that relevant information for you. That kind of fed into our determination there to have you to recommend that you remove that, and then let's have a specific discussion, on that.
And when you do that, if you would get us the information on, and it says it ain't about mobile homes, but they're manufactured homes, you know, the June 50, 76, if there's anything in there, that would be great.
Hey, do you change the pitch, then the double line couldn't?
Yeah. Yep, I would do that. Like I said, there's a few different titles that I need to go into to pull some stuff out for you guys, but I will make sure that we get all of that. Sent over.
City could.
Okay, so skipping over that one, we kind of already talked about this, but the existing design review section, so this would be, basically replaced by that, site plan review section or process that we outlined in the 1702, so there's probably a little bit more elimination that we can do in this, if we're kind of okay with that approach, adding that 1702, that kind of administrative procedural process section. In 1714, the soils and natural hazards, we're just real quick clarity and correction, so changing it, so that it reads land use authority, so that whoever the land use authority is knows that they, can require, you know, the geological or the soil survey report. So that's pretty minor. We get into 1715 all the way through 1721. These are the specific zoning districts that the city has. So generally, we've done just some cleanup, clarity, correctness issues. In this particular 1715, I tried to give you some language and some tie back to state statutes, 1098. This is just kind of good information just to have generally in your code. So that's kind of a best practice addition that we would recommend there with the relevant references there. When it comes to determining the zoning district boundaries, when they're unclear on the zoning district map, the current land use authority is listed as the planning commission. In practice, what we've traditionally seen across the state is that is another power that's been designated down to the zoning administrator to be able to clarify where the boundaries for the zoning districts actually are when they're not clear on the map. The city doesn't have to do it that way. They can leave the land use authority in that instance, the planning commission. But it's kind of the same discussion as we talked about on that other land use authority issue, kind of what it is you want to do. So some feedback on that one would probably be good for me today so that I can make sure we've got all the changes applied appropriately.
So historically, Kendall, what would happen with this, or has happened, it would be handled administratively. And then if there's a dispute, we would push it to the planning and zoning commission.
Okay.
That's how we've been doing it.
Okay.
So they're getting involved if there is a dispute, but it's on our zoning map, the addresses, the lots are pretty defined, but if there's an area of grayness, then we would definitely take it back through the body.
Okay. Okay, so we'll leave that one then. So I'll go through and make some adjustments just so that that's clean and clear. The other thing that you'll see across the zoning districts is the list of permitted and conditional uses. We suggested that you push them into a table format. One, because we found that tables, when it comes to all these different types of uses, are a little bit easier to read and decipher. Than having to do comparison in two different sections on specific uses. So that's going to be kind of a formatting recommendation that we have for you here. The other question that I have for the planning commission is that the table format, if that's acceptable, do you want to have it kind of sectioned out like it currently is, or would you like to see a master table that has all the zoning districts across it and all the different types of uses that you have, so that you can have all the zoning districts and all the uses in one table? Would that be beneficial or helpful, or not needed, I guess.
Like to see what that looked like, but imagine what that
I
looked
have an example of what it would look like, so you kind of have to use your imagination. This is the style that we generally lay it out in, so we usually will put all of the different zoning districts, and you have to kind of use your imagination because you guys, I think, have a few more than these. But you generally have your zoning districts, which have been defined that go across the top, and then you have all the different flavors of land uses, the trail along the side, and then you have the general chart where it's going to tell you, in this particular instance, we use the letters P for permitted, X for prohibited, and C for conditional. I think we've used a little bit variation on those abbreviations in the city's code. So you kind of have to use your imagination there, but this is generally what one of those tables looks like. One of the benefits of having a master table is that you can actually, what I found in practice is that sometimes it's easier to identify holes or gaps as to kind of thoughts on what particular uses are allowed in what zoning districts. Because sometimes when you have that table that's been segmented in all the different zoning districts, it's just kind of hard to wrap your head around everything that's going on in all the different zoning districts. Sometimes you're able to catch discrepancies and things like that when you put it in a master table, but it's totally a preference call. I just thought I'd bring it up to see what the thought of the commission was on it.
One point I point out, with our different zones, there's quite a bit of change. Something like this here, this master, is too generic for our areas, because if you go to our zoning and see the allowances, like R110, R120, R16s, they allow 6 fowl, 6 rabbits, 2 goats, 2 sheep. And you get into the R1s, there's requirements for animals, how much land is required for animals, so as far as generic, I don't think it works for us.
could you have one, this and the other?
That's what I was gonna suggest. What if we did
Yeah.
a master sheet like that?
They're not
spreadsheet,
specific.
And then in the individual zones have their own individual with explanations. For
Yep,
me, for
you
me,
totally can do that. I've done that in a few different codes that we've worked in, and it's worked out quite nice to have the master table as a reference, which then feeds into the other. The only thing that you have to remember though is if you do change, a permitted or a conditional use, you just have to make sure that you update it in both
Both,
tables.
yeah.
yeah, I like that idea. As staff, it's a lot easier for us, I believe, to go through and look at a zone and have it defined with a sheet there as well, but a master sheet would be fine as well, I think.
And you can still have specific requirements for the zones, like in the instance of animals, the example that was brought up. You can still have those fine-tuned requirements in each of the different zoning districts. You can still have those listed in the individual ones that they apply to. This just, like I said, at kind of broad glance, helps you identify kind of where the gaps are, or where the holes are, where the inconsistencies are in the when you're trying to figure out what uses are allowed in what zones. You'd kind of be amazed at what you find when you start to compile it onto a master chart, some of the consolidation that you can do, and just the, writing of requirements that are gonna be, more consistently, applied from zone to zone, and you kind of do it that way. Have it format. So there's definitely some pros to having it like master, so. I'll look at incorporating and doing it kind of both, and doing some of that to see if that might be helpful. Okay, and then, the other question that I have is kind of open-ended, is within the specific zoning districts, are there any, zoning districts that we need to focus in on, and help address any pain points, or issues?
Just an update, Kendall, I believe we can give them is we added the R2 zone.
Yes. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily that we added it, it just we found out that it hadn't been codified in the city's code. It had been previously adopted, just the last modifier never actually got it in the code. So yeah, it'll be the new edition of that. If there's any changes that need to be made to that, now would be a good time to get any of those in there.
I think that'd be the only suggestion, just dive into that where it's actually, it was approved, it just never did get rolled into the codified version years ago. And basically that's twin homes covers twin homes.
Just right. Both your. Mine. She just said.
And then on the last one here, real quick, the airport overlay zone, what I'll tell you is all the proposed changes that you have in here are actually to address House Bill 206, which was adopted during the 2023 session. Might get a specific report on that House Bill and the summary of all of that, but all of the changes that you see outlined in here are going to make sure that you're in compliance with that. So that's the only reason why we've got amendments proposed into your airport overlay is to address that. So going back to the land use authority chart. That's kind of the high-level summary of what we've got going on for the Title 17. So on the designation of land use authority type, we've got kind of thoughts on how traditional and general plan amendments are done, how the state requires temporary regulations to be done, zoning text amendments and zoning map changes, zoning map interpretations, and we've got temporary uses, permitted uses, conditional uses. So on the conditional uses, it just depends on the particular type of use, whether or not you had it listed as the zoning administrator, the planning commission, or the city council. So that was going to be kind of all three, and then you would have to defer to the table of land uses in order to identify the specific land use authority for that. Site plan review, development agreements, your non-conforming uses and non-compliant structures, variance appeals, and then constitutional takings. So those are all the flavors that you got on there. Hey, so with that, how is everybody feeling?
What's gonna have to happen to get this changed? Goes to the hearing, I mean, we approve it and the council does, and
So we can approve it. We need to have a public hearing actually, so in the planning and zoning body, we'll have our public hearing, we'll approve it. This is our work session just to go through everything. And then it'll go to city council with a public hearing as well, right, Kendall? So there's gonna be two public hearings.
It depends. Does your code require the council to do a public hearing? If not, the state doesn't require a second public hearing. It can just be on
In the planning.
regulars.
Okay, and I just realized we did not have a public hearing in our last planning and zoning when we approved 15 and 16, so we'll probably have to do 15, 16, and 17.
Yep, for sure. If you didn't advertise for the public hearing, yeah, you would need to do that, just to make sure you're crossing all i's and dotting all t's.
We approved, but we,
Yeah, vice versa.
I looked through your schedule and realized we did not do the public hearing, so.
Okay.
So that'll be the process, basically.
So we got a few changes that we're gonna look
Yeah.
at right before we.
So the recommended changes that we've given today, that you guys have given, Kendall, you can have those ready for our regular scheduled planning and zoning meeting?
Yeah, so did the planning commission get a copy of that revised timeline?
They did not, we're gonna have to modify it just a little bit. You and I'll call you after this.
Okay,
It's gonna be
Yeah.
just a little bit.
yeah, I make the changes. I don't see any reason as to why we're not still trying to go with kind of that specific timeline.
Okay, our city council is not going to be handling any of the code business tonight, so that will bump
Oh.
the schedule a little.
Okay, yeah, not a problem. Like I said, there's plenty of time. I think we're still tracking fine, so we should be okay.
Okay, so. And
Next year, right?
we can kick that animal one handle just for sake of time.
Yeah,
Let's,
okay, we'll catch it next time.
yeah, let's do that on a different work session. That would be a quick one. So,
I was like,
Okay,
this is a
sounds
bit
good.
confusing.
Anything else? We need to
I've got another question.
review,
Can, where land use authority is used throughout the whole thing, but it changes depending on where you're at. Is there some way to better define that?
I would love to say yes, but in my honest opinion, I think land use authority is the best term you can use.
you're talking about
And I think you
defining
have to
Yeah.
rely on anymore.
Yeah, as far as
That's part of my
defining who it is
Part
though.
kind of helpful. Mhm.
Kendall, I think his question was more, who is the land authority on all of the items, separate items?
Oh,
Defining
it
it that way.
depends on what type of application, here.
Right, and that's my concern is we see land use authority, but depending on,
It's a different body, so
Yeah.
it causes confusion.
Yeah.
yeah,
I was confused by that too, because you're saying land use authority, but the land use authority is city council for one scenario, it's zoning administrator for another scenario. The consistency is off, which I think could cause confusion, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's, I'll tell you, there is no good answer to it, because if you don't use the term land use authority and consistently refer back to the chart, if you do start putting the individual bodies in the text themselves, it makes your amendment process, when you do need to come in and update things, way more comprehensive. So that is one of the benefits to using the term land use authority throughout the entire title, because if you do ever need to amend who the land use authority is, you can just come in and make the changes specifically to the table. You know, and then your changes are at least consolidated to one point. You don't have to do as comprehensive like what we're doing now, where you have to go through every single chapter, section, line in order to make sure that you've got the right bodies there. So you run less of a risk of goofing something up if your changes are a little bit more consolidated in one specific area. So that's why ultimately I kind of always kind of defer to the style when you use land use authority throughout and then define it on the table. Because at least, you know, in the future, it's gonna cut down the expensiveness of future amendments in the title. But it's confusing no matter which way you go about it.
thank you.
Screen or when you.
Okay, Kendall, well, thank you for your time, and these are very helpful, I think, for all of us. to go through
Yeah,
it.
no problem. Like I said, if there's anything else, just reach out and let me know. Otherwise, I'll get working on these changes and I'll let you know when we're good to go.
Okay, and we,
Mike, was there anything?
Yeah, I was gonna jump in, Drew, and this isn't about this one. Just on those changes on the other titles, the revenue tax, and you know, that one, so we talked about last time I was out there.
yes,
I like the wording we've got for the council, and I don't wanna change it, but I guess what I'm asking is, should I be making those edits directed to those existing docs?
I would probably just do it in a different color so they can see what the changes are.
Okay,
If that would be,
yeah, I'll just, cause we kind of get busy with all the red lines, what I'll do is I'll make the, you know, council ones that you just talked about,
yeah,
and then I'll highlight it or something.
Yeah.
And put it in that discussion.
yeah, I think that would be helpful, just to do it that way. And then we can take, so where they're not meeting tonight on that matter, we'll bring that back for the first week of January meeting for approval on that one.
Okay, I'll leave those.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Oh, Mike, also your, your memorandum of understanding contract. We'll have the mayor sign that today. I don't think we have to take it to city council because we've already previously got it approved. So we'll get him to sign it before our council tonight.
Sounds good. On that,
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks, everybody. Thanks, Kendall.
Yep, okay.
I guess we were officially in meeting, right, which is to, end our meeting.
Okay.
I'll second it.
I'll,
Grab some pizza.
I can't think of the word easy today.
Accept.
All in favor, that's the one. Thank you.
Anyone else want a paper towel holder? I got one more in the truck. I got a lot more at home.
You know what, for offering, I'll take one. My
Okay.
grandma likes a lot of it.
Okay. You have one, Drew?
Next time you make some.
I got some more I made at home. I only could carry you when I came, but got one more in the truck.
Grab some pizza on your way out. There's still some pizza left.
Yes.
Your grandfather asked us to spend a lot of time in southwest Utah, northern Arizona.
Yep.
So how did your family get to northeast Utah?
Well, my
Yeah, that'll turn out.
my grandfather,
There's.
you know, he went back to St. George with his college degree in 1908. And he and Dr. McGregor got his college degrees in town. He was a civil engineer and one of his first to spend this large parcel. And he said to report in the next year. And make it a national park. He did the first survey of Zion National Park. But, my dad was raised in St. George. But after he went to school, in Logan, he was hired here as a